A nice car does not make someone wealthy. A designer lifestyle does not mean they're wealthy. Just because your neighbor is making good money doesn't automatically mean they're building financial security if their debt is quietly consuming everything they earn. There is a difference between looking financially successful and actually being financially successful. I'm Christiana Lovelace. I'm a licensed financial advisor, an accredited asset management specialist, and the owner of Diamond Point Financial. Each week on Pointe Perspective, we step inside the analytical process behind financial decision making, breaking down how professional investors interpret the system and build strategies designed to move with it. Over the last several weeks, we've been discussing how debt moves throughout the system, through the markets, through the economy, and through your personal financial life. This week, we're continuing that discussion by focusing on financial positioning. First, we'll look at international stocks and why global diversification can still play an important role within a portfolio, especially during periods of uncertainty and shifting market leadership. Second, we'll break down how the Federal Reserve is structured, why the chair does not independently control interest rates, and why the current leadership transition is drawing so much attention from investors and the market. And third, we'll bring it back to your personal financial life by discussing net worth, how to calculate it, why it matters, and why it often provides a more accurate picture of financial progress than income or lifestyle alone. Before you can build a stronger financial future, you have to understand your true financial position, not just the version people might see on the surface. Over the last several weeks, we've been talking about diversification, asset allocation, and how different parts of a portfolio respond to different environments. This week, we're looking at international stocks and why global diversification can play an important role within a portfolio. One of the biggest mistakes investors can make is assuming the market is only the United States. Now, don't get me wrong, the US market is incredibly important, and over the last decade, it has outperformed many international markets. That performance has led a lot of investors to question whether international exposure is even necessary anymore. But diversification is not about owning whichever area has performed best recently. It's about reducing concentration risk and building exposure to different economies, currencies, industries, and market cycles over time. International stocks represent companies located outside of the United States. That can include developed markets like Europe, Japan, and Canada, as well as emerging markets like India, Brazil, or parts of Southeast Asia. I've seen investors and even some advisors shy away from international exposure because it can feel less familiar, and therefore it can feel like you're taking on more risk. But the reality is, just like in the US, there are many well-known international companies people interact with every day. Brands like Samsung, L'Oreal, Shopify, Toyota, and Nestle. Now, I'm not recommending that you purchase these companies. They're simply examples of recognizable businesses that provide international exposure without necessarily feeling unfamiliar to investors. Just like different sectors inside the US market behave differently, international markets also respond differently depending on economic conditions, interest rates, currency movements, trade relationships, and geopolitical events. We've seen some of that recently with ongoing tension in the Middle East and broader global uncertainty. Certain international markets have experienced increased volatility, particularly in regions that are more sensitive to energy prices, trade disruption, or geopolitical instability. At the same time, currency fluctuations have continued to impact returns as global central banks respond differently to inflation and economic growth. So even when markets are reacting to the same global event, they don't always respond in the same way or to the same degree. There have also been periods of time historically where international markets outperformed US stocks for extended periods of time. In the early 2000s, for example, international equities outperformed the US market for several years as the dollar weakened and global commodity growth accelerated. Different regions tend to lead differently during different economic cycles. And because no one consistently knows which area will outperform next, diversification can help reduce the risk of becoming overly dependent on one market or one outcome. This ties directly back to what we've been been discussing with asset allocation. Every part of a portfolio has a role. U.S. large cap stocks may provide growth and stability. International stocks may provide geographic diversification and exposure to different economic environments. And emerging markets may also provide additional growth potential while also carrying higher volatility. Not every part of the portfolio is supposed to lead at the same time. Less experienced investors sometimes struggle to shift their mindset. Diversification doesn't mean every investment performs well together. It means your portfolio is not entirely dependent on a single country, a single market, or a single economic environment. Over the years, I've seen investors become heavily concentrated in whichever area performed best most recently. And while that can feel good during strong periods of performance, concentration risk becomes much more visible when leadership changes or when environments shift. That's why strategic portfolios are built around balance, not prediction. So when we look at international exposure today, the conversation shouldn't just be about short-term performance. It should be about how different pieces of the portfolio interact together over time. With so much attention currently surrounding the transition in Federal Reserve leadership, this is a great time to step back and explain how the Federal Reserve is structured. Because the Fed chair is the most public-facing figure, many people speak about the Fed as if one person is making all of the decisions. That's not really how the system works. This week, Jerome Powell is stepping down as chair of the Federal Reserve. He has chosen to remain on the Board of Governors for the time being amid some ongoing discussions around the Federal Reserve's renovation project. As of filming this video, Kevin Warsh is expected to take over leadership pending final Senate confirmation. And because many investors believe a leadership change could eventually influence interest rate policy, there's been significant discussions around what this transition could mean for the economy and the markets. It's important to keep in mind the Federal Reserve Chair is influential, but the chair does not control interest rates independently. Monetary policy decisions are made through votes by the Federal Open Market Committee, often referred to as the FOMC. The FOMC consists of 7 governors, the New York Fed president, and 4 rotating regional Federal Reserve Bank presidents who serve 1-year voting terms. The Board of Governors is appointed by the president and then confirmed by the Senate. These members serve staggered 14-year terms, with one term expiring every 2 years. The chair and the vice chair are nominated by the president from among the sitting governors and then confirmed by the Senate to serve 4-year terms. They can be reappointed as long as their term as governor has not expired. So the reason Chairman Powell is able to remain on the board is because his Senate-confirmed term as a governor doesn't expire until January 2028. This structure was intentionally built to create consistency over time, while still allowing for different regional and economic viewpoints to be represented. We're also in a time where leadership transitions are happening in a very politically charged environment. The Federal Reserve is designed to operate independently from day-to-day political pressure, and we've heard that discussed frequently over the last several months. That independence is considered important because interest rate decisions influence inflation, lending, employment, markets, and the broader economy. Those decisions can have long-term consequences. Next week, we're going to build on this discussion by breaking down how the Federal Reserve meetings operate, how rate decisions are communicated to the public, and why the markets react so strongly to the language surrounding those meetings. For the month of May, we're continuing our discussion around managing your debt. Last week, we talked about the different types of debt you can carry and how they function within your financial plan. This week, we're focusing on how debt affects the way you evaluate your overall success. Most people evaluate their finances based on income or how much money is sitting in their bank account, but that only shows a particular piece of the picture. Someone can have a high income and very little saved, or a modest income and significant assets. That's why one of the most important ways to evaluate your financial position is through your net worth. At its core, net worth is simply an equation: assets minus liabilities. Your assets include things like cash, investments, retirement accounts, real estate, business ownership, and other items of value. Your liabilities include mortgages, credit cards, auto loans, student loans, and any other obligations you or your spouse might have. Calculating your net worth is simply subtracting what you owe from what you own. And why does net worth even matter? Well, it matters because it gives you a broader understanding of your financial position and can significantly affect how we build your strategic financial plan. Two people may earn the same amount of money but have completely different levels of wealth depending on their debt, investments, assets, and how they've structured their finances over time. This is also why someone can appear financially successful outwardly while still carrying significant liabilities underneath the surface. And unfortunately, focusing on what someone seems to have has become more common in today's environment, especially with social media. A lot of people are evaluating financial success based on lifestyle, income, or appearances rather than the strength of their balance sheet. Income alone cannot create long-term wealth if liabilities continue growing with it. When it comes to strategic planning, debt affects more than just your monthly payment. And sometimes the most important thing you can do financially is simply force yourself to zoom out of the day-to-day cycle long enough to evaluate your situation objectively and thoroughly. This week, I want you to sit down with your spouse if you have one and calculate your household net worth. Then revisit it monthly or at the very least quarterly. It doesn't usually take very long, but over time it can become one of the most valuable tools for tracking your financial progress. A great example of how this can change your perspective might be your monthly mortgage payment. If you are only paying attention to your bank account, that payment may feel like an expense. But when you look at your net worth, you can see that a portion of that payment may also be increasing your equity and improving your overall situation. It allows you to see your financial journey as it's happening. And once you clearly understand your progress, you can begin making more intentional decisions about it, where you want to go. Strong financial planning is less about appearing wealthy and more about building a lasting financial foundation over time. Today, we continued the conversation around financial positioning and how different parts of the system influence the way we build and evaluate wealth over time. At the end of the day, real financial progress has more to do with positioning than appearance. It's not just about what you earn or spend or even trying to maximize every individual investment. It's more about how intentionally and strategically your financial life is structured. Now, if this helped bring some clarity to what you're seeing in the markets and the economy, or in your own financial life, make sure you subscribe to the channel for new discussions every Thursday. And if you'd like to subscribe to the newsletter summary that comes out every Friday, or maybe if you have questions about your own financial situation, you can learn more about Diamond Point Financial using the information below. I hope this offered some useful perspective. Until next week, take care.